The world tilted sideways of farming teaches you to read the land before it speaks. You learn the weight of clouds, the way cattle bunch before a storm, the silence that comes right before something breaks. The world, that same habit into every room I walked into. And the morning I stepped through the frosted glass door of Halvorsen and Webb Solicitors on Cashel Street in Christchurch. The worthy instinct I had fired at once. My daughter-in-law was sitting in the waiting room. The world tilted sideways. She had no reason to be there. No one had mentioned she would be there. She was wearing a cream blouse that probably cost more than a week's worth of groceries. The world tilted sideways, and she looked up at me with that particular smile she reserved for moments when she wanted you to believe she was genuinely pleased to see you. The world tilted 3 years trying to convince myself that smile was real. Standing in that doorway with the August cold still biting at my collar, the watching her uncross and recross her legs as if my arrival was merely a minor detail she had already accounted for, I stopped trying. I should go back to where this really began, which was 4 weeks earlier when we buried my brother. The world tilted sideways. Kenneth Arthur Okafor. He was my older brother by 6 years, and he had been, for as long as I could remember, the first person I rang when anything happened, good or bad. The grown up on a sheep station outside of Ashburton, the kind of childhood that either welds brothers together or tears them apart. It welded us. When I took over our parents' property at 28 after our father's hip gave out, Kenneth drove down from Auckland every shearing season for 7 years without being asked. The world, his marriage to his first wife ended after 11 years. He spent 4 months sleeping in the spare room of my farmhouse, and I never once made him feel he was in the way. The world tilted sideways. We were not the kind of brothers who talked much about the inner life. We didn't need to. We just showed up for each other, and that was the whole of it. The world tilted if never remarried after the divorce. He told me once, over a beer on the back veranda after the last of the shearing crew had gone home, the world tilted sideways, that he had given the deepest part of himself to one woman and he didn't think that kind of thing grew back. He seemed genuinely settled with that. The poured everything instead into the business he had built from nothing over 25 years in Auckland. The Worshall Refrigeration Company that had grown from a one-man operation out of a rented Penrose warehouse into a mid-sized firm with contracts across the upper North Island. The world, he was in his early 60s. The business was doing well enough that he had started talking seriously about selling his majority stake and moving somewhere quieter. The word he talked about a small property near Nelson, somewhere he could grow stone fruit and stop answering emails. He never made it to Nelson. The were on a Wednesday morning, Kenneth's car left State Highway 1 about 14 kilometers south of Palmerston North. There was a roadside barrier on that stretch and it slowed the vehicle. The world did not stop the worst of it. The impact was significant. He died before the ambulance arrived. He was 67 years old. The official finding was that he had fallen asleep at the wheel. The world tilted, which was plausible enough on a long motorway stretch at 6 in the morning. But the accident investigation noted that his blood alcohol was 0, that there were no brake marks on the road. The world tilted sideways and that the section of highway was straight and well maintained. It was ruled accidental. I had questions that I didn't know how to shape yet. The world tilted, so I set them to one side and focused on getting through the funeral. The world tilted sideways. The service was at St. Mary's in Maryvale, the church our parents had attended for 30 years before they passed. It was small and practical, which was exactly what Kenneth would have wanted. The Were arranged most of the details himself, including the burial plot alongside our mother and father at the cemetery in Papanui. My son Callum spoke. Callum was 34 at the time, the world working as a senior engineer at a Wellington infrastructure firm that he genuinely loved. He spoke about his uncle the way you speak about someone who helped set the course of you. The world tilted Callum to his first engineering expo at age 12, had walked him through the mechanics of refrigeration systems and load-bearing specifications the way other men talked about rugby. The world's entire professional instinct owed something to his uncle, and Callum knew it. The world tilted sideways broke once, somewhere near the middle. He stopped, pressed his knuckles briefly to his mouth and waited. No one in that church made a sound. My daughter-in-law sat beside Callum in the front pew. She placed her hand over his when he returned from the lectern. She dabbed at her eyes with a folded tissue. The word Kenneth perhaps 5 or 6 times over the 3 years of her marriage to Callum. He had been polite to her unfailingly. He had never said anything critical about her in front of me. The world tilted before he died. He had rung me on a Sunday afternoon, and after about 15 minutes of talking about nothing pressing, he had said, almost as an aside, "Geoff, the world for you keeping an eye on Callum." I said of course I was. Good, he said. Then he changed the subject. I had turned that phone call over in my mind many times in the weeks after the funeral. The world tilted. So weeks after we buried him, the office of his solicitor, a man named Philip Webb, rang to arrange the estate reading. Philip had acted for Kenneth for nearly 12 years, The handling everything from the business succession agreements to his personal will and the family trust. We had met twice at Kenneth's Auckland events over the years. The world tilted sideways. He struck me as careful and methodical, the kind of solicitor who chose his words the way a good farmer checks fencing before winter. His assistant rang me directly since I was named executor. The world tilted silently. It would be myself and Callum in attendance, along with a representative from the Hospice Foundation Kenneth had named as a secondary beneficiary. Standard procedure, she said. The world to mention of anyone else. So when I stepped into that waiting room and found my daughter-in-law already seated there, I stopped for a full 3 seconds. The world tilted sideways. She rose and stepped toward me with her arms slightly open, the kind of greeting that assumed a warmth you hadn't agreed to. Geoff, she said, I know this seems unexpected. Where's Callum? I said. The world tilted sideways. Not well, she said. He wasn't able to come. Philip's assistant was meant to let you know I'd be representing him. Philip's assistant had mentioned no such thing. I looked at Philip Webb. The ward appeared in the inner doorway. He looked at a point just past my left ear. Mr. Okafor, he said, please come through. I sat down at the table. She sat across from me, not beside me. The world opened a folder that looked too precise for a routine reading. Before we begin, I said, I'd like to understand on what basis my daughter-in-law is here representing my son. The world vetted her power of attorney for all financial and legal matters approximately 10 weeks ago. Philip said. He slid a notarized document across the table. The world, the nature of his current situation. What situation? The world had tilted. She folded her hands on the table. Callum has been struggling, she said. He was diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression in February. It's been quite bad. He's been unable to work for the past 8 weeks. He's under the care of a psychiatrist who strongly recommends limiting his exposure to high-stress events, including anything involving the estate of a close family member. She paused. We didn't want to add to what you were already carrying, Geoff. I looked at Philip. Did you know about this before today? The power of attorney was disclosed to me when it was filed. Yes, I had spoken to Callum on the phone 17 days earlier. He had been tired, yes, subdued, yes. But he had been coherent. The world tilted, talked at length about a bridge rehabilitation project he was working on. He had asked me to come up to Wellington the following month. When the date approached, the world tilted sideways. In-law had texted me to say he wasn't well enough for visitors. I had assumed he'd had a difficult stretch. The word not assumed anyone was systematically severing his connections to the outside world. The rest of the meeting passed in what I can only describe as a cold, still fog. The world had left the majority of his estate, including his shareholding in the refrigeration company and a substantial investment portfolio managed through a Vanguard-linked PI fund, to Callum. The portion went to the Hospice Foundation. Personal effects were directed to named individuals. Everything was orderly on paper. Everything was also now, by virtue of the power of attorney, the worldly accessible to my daughter-in-law on Callum's behalf. When Philip walked me to the lift afterward, he said nothing. He pressed the button. The lift arrived. And then, just before I stepped in, the world tilted sideways. Quietly, without looking at me, I'd like to speak with you privately, Mr. Okafor. Not here, not through the office. Somewhere I can be certain we're alone. The world tilted me a business card. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a mobile number different from the one on the front. The world tilted sideways. I drove home to Christchurch with that card on the passenger seat and tried to understand what I was sitting in the middle of. I rang the number that evening from the back porch of the farmhouse. The world tilted sideways. Philip picked up on the second ring. His voice was different from what it had been in the office. Lower. The professional composure was gone. I need to tell you something, he said. The world tilted sideways. I should have told you before today. I've been trying to work out how to do this for weeks. Tell me now. The Werther came to see me 8 months ago, he said. Not about the estate documents. Those had been finalized the year before. He came to give me something. He made me swear to deliver it only to you. The world tilted sideways. Only through a method he had specifically outlined. He used the phrase only after he is gone. At the time I thought he was being overly cautious. I don't think that anymore. The world tilted sideways. A package sealed, addressed to you in his handwriting. I've had it since October, and Geoff, there's something else. The day before Kenneth's accident, he rang me. The world tilted sideways, said he believed he was being watched. He said he had discovered something about your daughter-in-law that he was still working to confirm, and that if anything happened to him before he could, the world tiltage would explain everything. The next morning he drove onto State Highway 1 and never came back. I didn't speak for a long moment. Then I said, I need that package. The world 3 days later at a cafe in Rangiora, far enough from Christchurch that it felt deliberate. Philip arrived looking as though he hadn't slept since the funeral. The world turned envelope across the table before he had even sat down fully. My name on the front in Kenneth's handwriting. His initials across the sealed flap, the way he always initialed documents. A compact double loop that I had recognized on paperwork my entire adult life. Is any of this connected to you? I asked him. I needed to see his face when I asked. He looked directly at me. No. The world tilted sideways. For a long time. Your daughter-in-law began ringing my office 3 weeks after Kenneth died. She asked about the estate timeline. The world tilted the nature of my professional relationship with your family, about whether Kenneth had left anything with me separately from the formal documents. I told her no. The world tilted was I've been saying no to her ever since because I didn't know who I could trust. The world tilted his coffee to one side. I'm trusting you now. I opened the envelope in the car park because I could not wait another minute. Inside was a USB drive, a printed report from an investigative firm called Clearwater Group in Auckland, and a handwritten letter on Kenneth's usual yellow legal pad. His handwriting. The world tilted sideways. I sat in the cab of my ute with the heater running and I read it. It began, Geoff, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. The world tilted sideways. I need to be very clear-headed right now because there is no one else. He only called me Geoff in letters or when it mattered. He had called me mate or just plain brother most of my life. The world tilted sideways. I'm going to tell you what I know. 7 months ago I hired a private investigator. The reason was a phone call I overheard that I was never meant to hear. The world tilted sideways was a Callum's birthday dinner at his apartment in Wellington in March. I stepped out onto the balcony to get some air and the kitchen window was open behind me. She was on the phone to someone. The world tilted sideways. She was talking about timelines. About how the father's health was a manageable variable, meaning you, Geoff. About how Callum was being brought to a state of full dependency ahead of schedule. About how once the business was sorted and the older one was gone, her word was settled, everything would be clean. The world tilted so her word, clean. I didn't understand all of it in the moment. I started paying attention after that. The investigator's report is in this package. Here is what he found. The war name is not Renee Parada. It's Caroline Sorby. She has operated under 3 different legal identities in the past 14 years. Before Callum, she was married to a man named Geoffrey Strickland in Tauranga. He was 61, widowed, no children from his first marriage, the owner of a mid-sized engineering supply firm. He began exhibiting signs of cognitive decline within 14 months of the marriage, what his GP initially classified as early-onset dementia. The world tilted sideways. He signed over power of attorney before his deterioration became advanced enough for anyone to question the process formally. He died from what was recorded as a cardiac event 20 months into the marriage. She inherited the significant majority of his estate. She sold the business within 4 months. The world tilted Geoffrey Strickland. There was a man named Terence Wakefield in Napier, an older widower, financially established, no close family in the region. The world case. There was an adult son who contested the will. The case settled out of court. She walked away with approximately 55% of the estate. The investigator believes she identifies men in Callum's situation. Professionally successful, emotionally close to an older male relative who controls significant capital. Somewhat isolated by demanding work schedules and geography. She builds the marriage, she builds the trust. The word, she begins the systematic process of separating the younger man from his support network while positioning herself to benefit when the older relative is gone. Callum is not the primary target. You are, I am, or I was. Callum is the mechanism. The world. How to approach Callum directly about this. You know how he is. Once he decides to love someone, he will defend them before he hears the other side. The world tilted sideways. He told me when I tried to gently suggest he think carefully about the financial structures in the marriage that I was jealous of his happiness. It broke my heart, but I understood it. The word till she has had 4 years to work on him. The USB drive contains recordings. I placed a small audio device in my kitchen in Auckland after I became suspicious. The world tilted sideways. She visited twice in the months before I wrote this letter under the pretense of dropping off food. She made calls from my kitchen while I was supposedly in another room. The world tilted sideways. You will hear her speaking to someone about the structure of the estate, about what she calls the handover window, and about what she refers to as the resolution of the last outstanding matter. Sideways, Geoff. The world tilted sideways. I believe she is going to have me killed. I believe it will be made to look like an accident. I believe you are next, and I believe Callum will be too far gone by then to understand what has happened. The world tilted sideways. Don't have proof that would satisfy a court yet. That's what I've been trying to build. If I don't get the chance, you have to finish it. I know you will. You always were the more stubborn one, even when you didn't think so. Your brother, Kenneth. The war hands were steady by the time I finished. I had spent 40 years on a farm in Canterbury. The world tilted floodwaves and collapsed wool prices, and one fire that took out the back paddocks in February of 1996 and very nearly took the shearing shed with them. The world tildiness was something I had trained into myself over decades of having no choice. But underneath it, sitting in that car park in Rangeora with the engine running and the letter in both hands, the world tilt, a thing I had not felt since the morning my wife passed away 9 years ago. A grief so complete and cold it was almost the same as clarity. He had known. The world tilted sideways, spent months trying to protect us, and he had been killed before he could finish. I sat in that car park until I could think in straight lines. The world tilted Sigator's report confirmed everything Kenneth had written and added more. Caroline Sorby had been charged in 2011 in Hamilton in connection with a property transaction fraud. The charges were reduced on a negotiated plea and she served no custodial time. There had been 2 civil proceedings, both settled confidentially. The word she had changed her legal name twice through standard family court processes in New Zealand, first to Renee Costello and then to Renee Parada, the name under which she had met Callum at a corporate function in Wellington 5 years ago. The man she referred to repeatedly in the USB recordings as D was identified through the investigator's surveillance as Dale Fenwick, the world-tilted pharmacist operating out of a dispensary in Palmerston North with a prior caution from MedSafe in connection with controlled substance discrepancies. The investigation had been closed without findings. The world too listened to the recordings alone in the farmhouse with the lights out and the dogs quiet on the veranda. Her voice in those recordings was the part I kept returning to. It was perfectly calm. The world tilted sideways. She spoke about my brother as though he were already past tense while he was still alive. She said in one recording, he's been making inquiries about the estate structure. The world tilted sideways. He asked Dale something at dinner he shouldn't have known to ask. We need to move the timeline forward. A male voice responded, something I couldn't fully make out. She said, the motorway route on Wednesday mornings, it's consistent. Dale knows what to do Wednesday. Kenneth drove that route to his business contacts in Palmerston North every second Wednesday. The world tilted sideways at the police. I went to the Christchurch Central Station first with the USB drive and the printed report and Kenneth's letter. The word detective I spoke to was professional and patient and told me that audio recordings obtained through undisclosed listening devices might present admissibility issues. The word that the prior marriage evidence, while concerning, was circumstantial in relation to Kenneth's accident as it stood. I asked to be referred elsewhere. The world's eventually connected to a detective in the Financial and Serious Crime Unit based in Auckland, a woman named Detective Senior Sergeant Patricia Halvorsen. The world tilted sideways, who listened for a long time and asked the kind of questions that told me she already understood the shape of what I was describing. She said she needed time to assess the evidence properly. The word I should not contact my daughter-in-law or attempt to speak to Callum directly until they had evaluated their options. I lasted 5 days. Then I drove to Wellington. The world tilted didn't come to the door. She did. She was dressed casually, completely unbothered, as if she had been expecting an easy afternoon. Geoff, she said, I'm glad you came. The world tilted sideways. Callum has been asking about you. I said I wanted to see him. She stepped back and let me in, which surprised me. Callum was in the lounge. He had lost weight. The world tilted sideways. He was unshaved in a way that looked like exhaustion rather than intention, and there was a flatness to his eyes that landed on me somewhere in the chest. The world tilted sideways still when I came in, and he held on to the hug a beat longer than he normally would. Dad, he said, it's good to see you. We talked for about 20 minutes with her in the room the entire time, positioned on the arm of the sofa, inserting small, the world to measured sentences whenever the conversation moved toward anything she didn't control. When I tried to ask Callum specifically about the power of attorney arrangements, she said smoothly, the world into financial things today. Geoff, the doctor really wants Callum to keep stress levels low. Which doctor? I said Dr. Alderton. He's been absolutely wonderful. Callum, the world tells you find him helpful, don't you? Callum nodded slowly. I'd like his contact details, I said. I'd like to speak with him directly. I'll have someone send them through, she said. She never did. The word Detective Halvorsen rang me 11 days later. She had run a thorough background check on Dale Fenwick. The world been questioned in connection with the circumstances of Geoffrey Strickland's death in Tauranga, the first husband in the investigator's report. He had not been charged. The World Tills dispensary in Palmerston North had a flag on file with MedSafe. The file had been closed. She told me she believed what I was telling her. The world to pursue charges in connection with Kenneth's accident. She needed something more concrete. The recordings established pattern, planning, and intent, but not the specific act. What she needed, the world tilted sideways, she said, was either physical evidence linking Fenwick to Kenneth's accident or testimony from someone inside the circle. The only person inside that circle, I told her, was my son, and she had him medicated. The work on the assumption that he's been given something, Halvorsen said. If we move too quickly and she realizes we're active, she'll run. She has done it before. And Callum, the word what he's been given and for how long, may not be a reliable witness in the immediate term. We need to be patient, and we need to give her a reason to make a move. I said I was listening. The plan she proposed was straightforward to describe and frightening to think about. That would allow a piece of carefully constructed information to reach my daughter-in-law. Specifically, the world tilted sideways, that Kenneth's long-time accountant had flagged to Philip Webb the possibility that Kenneth had placed a significant sum of capital into a separate private structure in the months before his death. The world tilted sideways, trust-like arrangement that would be inaccessible to anyone claiming through the estate. The information was entirely fabricated. The world too bully was to make her believe that the money was about to move out of reach. Halvorsen believed that if she thought the financial window was closing, the world aggressively to secure what she already controlled, possibly by moving directly against me. That would give them what they needed. The world tilted sideways, Halvorsen said. We'll have people in position. If she approaches you about the supposed trust or makes any kind of overture or threat, we'll have it. The world tilted sideways, and if she decides not to have that conversation and instead instructs Fenwick to take care of the problem the way she did in Palmerston North, the world tilted surveillance on Fenwick from the moment the information is released. I agreed. I did not sleep more than 2 hours that night, though the false information was released through a careful sequence of professional contacts. The world tilted sideways, letting the relevant details slip during a routine phone call with a paralegal he knew had connections to a financial advisory firm in Auckland that my daughter-in-law used. The words a long chain, but it was enough. 4 days later she rang me. The world tilted sideways. Her voice was warm in the particular way that costs something to maintain. Geoff, she said, I've been thinking about you. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot at the reading. The world tilted sideways, and I take responsibility for that. I should have communicated better about Callum's situation. Could we start again? I'd love for you to come up to Wellington for dinner. The Worley needs to see you, and I think a normal family evening would do him the world of good. I said yes. Halvorsen put a team in position the following Friday. 2 vehicles in the street, one at the end of the block, a second team maintaining visual on Fenwick's accommodation in Palmerston North. A senior officer coordinating across both locations. The Halvorsen herself was in the primary vehicle outside the apartment building. The world tilted sideways. She told me not to eat or drink anything before I had visually confirmed that anything offered to me had come from the same preparation as what was being served to others. The world tilted to Wellington with my chest tight the entire way. She answered the door in an apron. Whatever was on the stove smelled real and slow cooked, and the apartment was warm in a way that was designed to lower your guard. Callum was at the kitchen table. He looked worse than the last time. His movements were careful and deliberate. The world kind of careful you see in people who aren't fully sure of themselves. Dad, he said, reaching up as I came in, and I put my hand on his shoulder and felt how much weight he had lost. The world tilted sideways. She was moving between the bench and the stove with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. I made a lamb stew, she said. I remembered it was your favorite, Geoff. Callum, why don't you show your dad the new table you set up in the study? Callum rose slowly. I followed him down the hallway. The world tilted sideways. The study was dim. He turned on the desk lamp, and I saw the table she had mentioned, a wide drawing surface set up in the corner. But Callum didn't look at it. He looked at me, and when he did, the world tilted sideways. His eyes were different from what they had been in the kitchen. Still tired, still heavily carrying something, but present in a way they hadn't been out there. Dad, he said quietly. What she's doing. The room shifted. I stopped taking the pill 6 weeks ago, he said. I've been faking it since then. She checks my medication tray every morning before she leaves. The word palming the capsules and disposing of them at work. I've been going in 3 days a week, just to have somewhere to do it safely. The fog started lifting after about 2 weeks. The world tilt's been slow, but I'm thinking clearly. I gripped the edge of the drawing table. The world tilted sideways. Said I found a copy of Uncle Kenneth's investigator's report. Not the one he left with Philip. She doesn't know that one exists. But Kenneth had a duplicate in his Auckland office safe. The had the combination since I was 17. His voice stayed low and steady. I've been recording for 4 weeks, he said. Everything she says in this apartment, every call she makes from the kitchen. The word had devices running since the 3rd week. He took his phone from his pocket. I have her and Fenwick planning together. The world tilted sideways. She told him you were coming tonight and that this was the opportunity to deal with the remaining problem. Her exact words. He looked at me. The stew, Dad. Don't touch it. The world tilted this man. This person I had taught to ride a farm bike at 7, driven 6 hours each way to every secondary school rowing regatta. The world tilted church hospital when he had a badly broken arm at 19 from a rugby tackle that went wrong. The world tilted sideways. This man who had stood in a church 4 weeks ago and told everyone present that his uncle had taught him to see the world in terms of what things could hold and what they couldn't. The world stopped mid-sentence and waited in silence until he could go on. How long have you been carrying this by yourself? I said. Since I found Kenneth's copy, I couldn't contact you directly. The world tilts the phone. She checks the email. I've been waiting for a moment when I could get you away from her without triggering anything. He put his hand briefly on my arm. The world tid police involved. Detective Halvorsen. She's outside right now. Does she know about Fenwick's brother-in-law? What? The world tilted sideways. Fenwick has a brother-in-law in the Palmerston North Police. He's been running her name through the system every time there's been any official inquiry. The world tilted days ago that someone had been making calls about Kenneth's accident. Fenwick's brother-in-law checked the district logs. Whoever Halvorsen has coordinating in the lower North Island. It cannot be anyone connected to the Palmerston North Station. I had my phone out before he finished the sentence. I sent Halvorsen a single message, brother-in-law PN station. The reply came in 7 seconds. Understood. Standing by. From the kitchen her voice came down the hallway, pleasant and unhurried. You two, stew's ready. Come while it's hot. I looked at each other. Can you stall her? I said. Yes. He paused. Dad, I need to say something. I'm sorry I didn't listen to Uncle Kenneth when he tried to warn me. I'm sorry for what I said to him when he brought it up last year. The world tilted sideways. You saw it in time, I said. That's the whole of it. We walked back to the kitchen. She was ladling stew into 3 bowls at the bench with her back to us, and she turned with 2 of them already in hand. The world tilted sideways, placing one in front of Callum and moving toward me with the other. That same calibrated smile in place, the one that never quite reached the part of the eyes you'd need to trust it. Actually, I said, we're like to use the bathroom before we sit down. She stopped. Something shifted behind the smile without changing the smile itself. A rapid internal calculation. Of course, she said. The whirlway. I pressed my back to the wall and said quietly toward the collar of my shirt, Halvorsen, it's in the stew. We're ready. 3 seconds. Then the front door opened. The world tilted sideways, first with 2 officers behind her, and a third entering through the kitchen sliding door. My daughter-in-law spun toward the sound. She had Callum's bowl still in her hand. The world tilted sideways. She set it down on the bench very carefully, which was the strangest part, that deliberateness in the middle of everything falling apart. And then I watched her face move through several expressions in quick succession. Shock, then calculation, then something colder than either of those things. The world tilted of expression that was more unsettling than anger would have been. Mrs. Parada, Halvorsen said, displaying her badge, or would you prefer Miss Sorby? The world tilted sideways. The name registered on her face the way a physical impact would. She moved toward the hallway door. An officer was already positioned there. She stopped with her back to the bench and looked at Callum. He met her eyes without blinking. You, she said. 4 weeks, he said, every room. The world tilted sideways. She was handcuffed and walked out through the front door, and I stood in the kitchen of my son's apartment and watched him for a moment. This lean, exhausted, the worldly composed person who had spent 6 weeks moving through a medicated fog, forcing his way back to the surface day by day. The wording a case from inside his own home that I could not have built without him. I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. The world's forensic analysis confirmed within 48 hours what Halvorsen's team had already suspected from the beginning. The stew contained a compound associated with veterinary sedation. The world tilted concentrated to a level that would have produced severe cardiac suppression in a man of my age and weight. The world tilted slightly in a man with the slightly elevated blood pressure that had appeared in my last checkup, and that my daughter-in-law had evidently obtained records of through the accountant's files. The world-deuced concentration it would have been difficult to differentiate from a natural cardiac event. At the concentration in my bowl, the laboratory assessment was unambiguous about intent. The world tilted Fenwick was arrested at his residence in Palmerston North at the same moment the officers entered the Wellington apartment. The world tilted Seiko was identified through NZTA camera footage as having been on State Highway 1 on the morning of Kenneth's accident. The world positioned in a manner consistent with deliberate interference with another vehicle. The world was additional material on his personal devices that I will not describe in detail because it concerns my brother. The world is still not fully able to think about it without a kind of anger that has nowhere useful to go. The world tilted's brother-in-law at the Palmerston North Police was stood down pending a full internal investigation. The world tilted sideways. My law entered a not guilty plea and requested 3 adjournments over the following months. Her defense argued that the recordings Callum had made in the apartment were inadmissible. The world grounds that the other party had not consented. But because Callum was the primary leaseholder of the apartment, and had consented to the recording of common areas within his own home, the world tilted sideways because New Zealand law under the Privacy Act and relevant case precedent allows for recording within a private dwelling by the occupant in defined circumstances, particularly where the occupant is documenting conduct they reasonably believe is criminal. The recordings were admitted. Kenneth's kitchen recordings obtained in his own home were admitted on similar grounds. The world tilted Cypher Strickland in Tauranga was referred for reinvestigation. His remains were examined under court authority. The world's analysis found traces of a compound consistent with the prolonged administration of a substance that progressively impairs cognitive function without obvious external markers. His daughter, The word raised concerns with 2 separate investigators over the years, and had each time been told she had insufficient grounds to pursue the matter. The rang me on a Thursday evening after the findings were made public. She wept for a long time. I stayed on the line. There was not much to say, and I did not try to say too much. The word Callum recovered slowly. The compound she had been introducing into his food over a period of approximately 9 months had not produced permanent neurological damage. The world tilters said was partly fortunate timing and partly the result of Callum having stopped when he did. The first weeks of recovery were hard. The world tilted sideways, exhausted and emotionally raw in ways he wasn't used to being, and he spent long stretches sitting on the veranda of the farmhouse while I did jobs that didn't particularly need doing. The world tilted sideways just to have an ear. We talked about Kenneth, we talked about the shearing seasons, the old station. The world tilted sideways, used to explain technical things as though they were just common sense that anyone would arrive at eventually. We talked about the farm. The world back to Christchurch for 3 months during the recovery period. He put his drafting board in the sleep out and worked from there. He began ringing old friends, people who had gone quiet over 4 years in ways he hadn't quite registered at the time. The slow reclaiming of a life, piece by piece, contact by contact. He comes to the farm most Sundays now. The world tilted sideways. We cooked together, which was something his mother and I used to do every weekend when she was alive and which I had stopped doing alone after she passed. The world tilted sideways. Callum started again one Sunday without saying anything about it, just came into the kitchen and started chopping vegetables, and I let him. The world tilted because some things don't need to be named to be meaningful. The world tilted Sapani was restructured under a properly supervised trust arrangement that will eventually pass to Callum with appropriate legal protections and oversight in place. The world Webb stepped back from his firm in the months following the proceedings, citing personal reasons. He sent me a letter I read once and put away. He had been frightened for a long time. The world's fear had made him slow when he should have been fast. He knew it. I visit Kenneth's grave at the cemetery in Papua Nui when I need to think clearly. The mornings are quiet there. The world tilcularly in winter, which is when I tend to go. I stand for a while and talk to him the way I always talk to him, plainly and without any ceremony. I tell him what Callum is working on. The world tilted sideways. I tell him the company is in good hands. I tell him that the woman who had him killed is spending a long time somewhere without much to look at, and that the man who helped her is in a place that is similar. The word tell him that his instinct to pay attention, to document, to build something and leave it where I could find it instead of trying to carry it alone, saved my life and his nephew's life both. The world tilted sideways was always the more methodical one, even when I thought I was. I think about the first line of that letter often. I need you to be very clear-headed right now because there is no one else. The world tilted sideways. There were 100 points between Kenneth's funeral and that Friday evening in Wellington when I could have stopped. When I could have told myself the evidence was too uncertain, the war risk too significant, the legal process too slow and too imperfect to carry the weight. The world toed 100 points where a reasonable man might have waited and hoped, and been found later in circumstances that would have been ruled accidental. The world tilted sideways. Stopped being a reasonable man when I finished reading that letter in a car park in Rangiora. I do not regret it. The world tilted fear with me now is not the fear, though the fear was real and I would be lying to diminish it. What stays with me is this. The people who love us sometimes go to extraordinary lengths to protect us without ever letting us know what it costs them. The Warneth spent the final months of his life building a case he never got the chance to present. Callum spent 6 weeks navigating a medicated fog deliberately, consciously, one day at a time. The world tilted sideways, building a case from inside the room where it was being used against him. Both of them did what they did because that is what you do for the people you cannot stand to lose. The world tilted. So there are people in this world who understand precisely how much you value the relationships you have built, and they use that understanding not to protect you but to take from you. They are patient. The world tilted sideways. They are methodical. They are very good at looking like the thing they are not. If someone you love begins to seem distant, begins to cancel plans, the world tilted drift in ways that feel off but that you can never quite name. Do not tell yourself it is a difficult season. Pay attention, ask again, show up. The cost of being wrong about your concern is a mildly awkward conversation. The cost of not having that concern can be everything. And if someone you trust passes you something quietly, the world tilted sideways, something they couldn't say out loud and had to find another way to give you, treat it seriously. Take the time. Don't set it aside for later. Kenneth did not have a later, though he had the time he had and he used all of it. The world Tam, 63 years old. I have buried a wife and a brother and I came closer to joining them than I care to spend much time thinking about. The world tilted sigh here because the people around me refuse to accept the alternative. I do not take any of it lightly, not any of it.